When Sophie, a married woman struggling with overdue rent, accepts help from her landlord Adrian, she never expects it to awaken something far more dangerous than debt. Lingering glances, quiet tension, and moments charged with unspoken desire blur the lines between what's right and what's undeniably tempting. One evening in the quiet courtyard, Adrian finally confesses the feelings he's been hiding, and Sophie is forced to confront her own. Will she cross the line, or will she fight the yearning that's been growing inside her for months? A gripping story of emotional tension, forbidden attraction, and the painful choice between loyalty and longing. But when her husband appears out of nowhere, will it be too late to turn back? Or has the damage already been done? If you're drawn to raw emotional stories about love, marriage, and the silent battles we fight inside, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. Drop a comment and share how this story made you feel. Your voice means everything here. Thank you for being part of the journey. I was 3 months behind on rent. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, my stomach clenched. Adrian, my landlord. I had never been late before, but things had gotten tight and now I was in trouble. When I first moved into the building, I barely noticed him. He was polite, professional, maybe a little too serious. But the last few months had been different. Every interaction felt charged. The way he looked at me lingered a second too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I wasn't so sure. That evening I heard a knock at my door. I didn't need to check. I knew it was him. I hesitated, but ignoring him wasn't an option. I opened the door slowly. "Have," I said, forcing a tight smile. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Evening, Sophie." There it was again, that quiet, measured way he said my name. "I know I owe you," I started. "I just need a little more time." He exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. "You've been saying that for weeks." I swallowed hard. "I know, I'm trying." His eyes flickered over me, not in a way that felt inappropriate, but enough to make my skin prickle. I was just wearing a tank top and shorts. Nothing special, but suddenly I felt seen. "I don't want to evict you," he said finally, "but you need to give me something." The way he said it made my breath hitch. He meant money, of course he meant money. But still, the way he said it, I bit my lip. "I don't have it yet, but I'll figure something out." A muscle in his jaw flexed. He shifted, glancing down the hallway before stepping inside just a little, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "I could give you a little more time," he murmured, his voice lower now. I should have stepped back. I should have told him no, but I didn't move. His gaze dipped just for a second to my mouth. My breath came faster. This was dangerous. I was married, he was married, but for the first time in months I didn't feel powerless. I felt like I had a choice, and that terrified me more than anything. He didn't move away. The air between us seemed to thicken, and I could feel my pulse quicken. It was a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Like standing on the edge of something I couldn't see but knew would change everything if I took one more step. I couldn't read him anymore, not completely. "You're sure you don't want me to help?" he asked, his voice low, a little too intimate for a conversation about rent. His eyes weren't on my face anymore. They were fixed on the space between us. "What do you mean, help?" I was stalling. The words came out in a rush, but I didn't know if I wanted to hear his answer. I felt a heat creeping up my neck, spreading across my chest. He leaned closer just enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something earthy, a little spicy, something I hadn't noticed before, but now felt overwhelming. "I could help you," he said, almost a whisper. His hand was resting casually on the doorframe, but it was too close to my arm, just an inch, but the proximity felt like miles. I should have said no. I should have shut the door in his face and gone back to my kitchen where I could breathe again, but something inside me kept me rooted to the spot, unable to escape the pull between us. "I am not sure what you mean," I stammered, my voice thin. He moved even closer then, close enough that his breath brushed against my skin, and I felt an unmistakable shift in the air. It was like everything in that moment slowed down, and I realized I had made a terrible mistake by opening that door. "Sophie," he said my name again, this time with something behind it. It wasn't just his landlord's voice anymore. It was the voice of someone who knew me in ways I wasn't ready to admit. The kind of voice that made my stomach flip. "I don't want you to be in a tough spot," he continued, and his eyes held mine with an intensity that made it hard to think. "But I can't keep giving you time without any kind of assurance." There it was again, assurance. He wasn't talking about rent anymore. He was talking about something else. Something I didn't want to think about but couldn't stop myself from considering. His hand shifted, almost by accident, brushing against my arm. It was barely a touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I pulled back, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. "I know I'm behind," I said, my voice almost a whisper now, betraying me. "I know I just need some more time," but he wasn't listening to me anymore. His eyes had locked onto my lips, and suddenly everything felt much too real. I couldn't stop the thought from forming, warring in my mind. What if I just kissed him? What if I let myself give in to that gnawing feeling in my chest? No, I couldn't. I was married. He was married. This was insane. I stepped back, but he didn't move away. Instead, he reached out, and his hand hovered just in front of my face. It wasn't a touch, not yet, but it was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his palm, like he was waiting for me to make the decision for both of us. "Sophie," he said again, and this time his voice had dropped even lower, softer, like a whisper that was meant only for me. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want." My heart was beating so loud I thought it might burst. I wanted to look away, to move, to run and escape the situation. But I couldn't. His presence was too much, and I was afraid that if I moved too fast he might reach out and pull me back in. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he added, and his hand finally touched my arm. It wasn't forceful, it wasn't demanding, but it was there, solid, warm, and full of intention. His thumb brushed over my skin and it felt like a spark had ignited in my chest. The pressure was building in my chest, suffocating me. I wanted to say something, to tell him to leave, to pull away, to stop, but the words got stuck. My mind was too full, too overwhelmed by the sensation of his touch. I started, but my voice cracked, and I felt a surge of heat rush to my face. I had never been good at saying no, not to anyone really, not when I was unsure, not when it felt like the other person's desire was pulling me along, pushing me forward. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, and in that moment it was like the whole world had disappeared. It was just me and him, standing in this dim hallway with everything suspended between us. I could feel the tension between us, tight as a drum. I could feel it in the way my pulse raced, the way his thumb lingered against my arm, the way his body was so close to mine, but not close enough. Everything in me screamed to stop this, to break the silence, to push him away. But everything else, the part of me that was tired of always doing the right thing, that part that was just desperate for something different, whispered that maybe I should just let go. "Sophie," he said, his voice so close now that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I looked up at him, and for a moment, the weight of what was happening hung there between us, a single breath away from something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. His face was inches from mine, his eyes searching mine, asking me a question that was never spoken but felt so real. And then, just as I was sure he was going to pull me in, just as I was sure the line between right and wrong would be crossed in an instant, he stepped back. It was like the spell had been broken. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly as shaken as I was. He started, but his words faltered. I shouldn't have pushed you like that." His voice was filled with regret, but the tension didn't leave. It hung in the air, heavy, like it was still waiting for one of us to make the next move. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if I was apologizing to him, to myself, or to my husband. "I didn't mean to." He stopped himself again, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I don't want to make things harder for you. Just take care of the rent." I nodded, stepping back. I was more confused than ever. My heart was still racing, my thoughts scattered. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. "Thank you," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. He nodded, and for a moment we just stood there, caught in the moment we almost shared. And then, just as quickly as it had started, he turned and walked away. I closed the door behind him, and as I leaned against it, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I couldn't help but wonder if it was over, or if it was just beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one stretching out longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling of that moment when he almost crossed the line. Every time I passed him in the hallway or saw him out in the yard, the air between us seemed thick, charged with something we both tried to ignore, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was supposed to feel relieved, wasn't I? He had stepped back. He had apologized. Everything should have gone back to normal, but it didn't. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, like he saw something in me, something that made him hesitate but not let go entirely. I thought about it at night when I tried to sleep, when I thought I could hear his footsteps in the hallway. Even though I knew it was all in my head, I couldn't avoid him forever though. It was late one evening when I received another message from him. His words were simple but direct. Can we talk, please? I need to explain something. At first, I thought about ignoring it. I thought about pretending like it was just a simple misunderstanding. Something that I could chalk up to a moment of weakness. But the truth was I wasn't sure anymore. The lines had blurred. I didn't know what I was feeling anymore, only that I needed to understand what was going on. I agreed to meet him in the building's courtyard. He said it was quieter there. The evening was warm and the courtyard was empty. When I arrived, I saw him standing near the bench, his back to me. He looked different. His posture was more rigid than usual. His hands shoved into his pockets like he was trying to keep himself in check. I took a deep breath and approached him. Sophie, he said without turning around, I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I know, I said, my voice betraying me as I took a step closer, but I don't know what happened. I don't know why I let it go so far. He turned to face me, and for a brief moment neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, a kind of understanding in the silence that had grown between us. I shouldn't have crossed that line, he said, his voice rough, but I want to be honest with you. I've been fighting something. I raised an eyebrow. Fighting what? He stepped forward, closing the distance between us just enough that I could feel his presence enveloping me. I've been fighting how I feel about you. The words hit me like a slap, though I knew I should have expected them. Still, hearing him say it out loud, admitting it, made my heart race. My thoughts scatter. I don't want to make this harder for you, he continued, but his voice had changed. It was no longer regretful. It was desperate almost. I don't want to ruin everything we've built here, but I can't stop thinking about you. I couldn't breathe. I felt my knees weaken as he moved closer. I knew I should step back. I knew I should tell him this was wrong, that we couldn't do this. But when he reached out and gently touched my arm, I couldn't bring myself to pull away. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly, but I don't know how to let go. The air around us felt thick. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and for a moment I wasn't sure where the boundaries were anymore. Everything felt like it was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't control. I should have said something, but the words felt stuck, caught somewhere deep inside me. I'm married. I finally whispered, as if saying it aloud would make everything snap back into place. I know, he answered, I know you are, but I can't stop this feeling, Sophie. I need to know if you feel the same way. His words hung in the air between us like a heavy weight, and in that moment I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. The choice was mine, but it felt like I didn't have the strength to make it. I don't know what to say, I admitted, the words finally coming out in a rush. I know, he replied. I don't expect you to know right now, but I need to know if you feel it too. I need to know if you're willing to take a chance on us. His eyes were intense, searching mine with an honesty that both terrified and excited me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow. I couldn't deny it. I had been feeling something that had been building up ever since that night he came to my door. But I couldn't. No, I shouldn't let it go any further. But what if I did? The thought flashed through my mind before I could stop it. What if I let myself give in to this? What would it be like to finally feel wanted, to feel desired, to have someone take care of the need that had been gnawing at me for months? He reached for me again, his hand resting gently on my cheek, his thumb brushing over my skin. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt of electricity through me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I almost forgot everything else, the consequences, the choices, the people who would be affected. I was about to make a choice, but just as I closed my eyes, as his face moved closer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the courtyard. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The footsteps grew louder, faster, and I pulled away, my eyes wide in panic. It was him. My husband. I turned, barely able to breathe as I saw him rounding the corner, his face hard, his eyes filled with something I couldn't decipher. Sophie, he said, his voice icy. I thought I told you to stay inside. And in that moment, with my heart racing and my head spinning, I realized that everything was about to change. Was it too late? Had we gone too far? I looked at Adrian, at the man I had almost let cross the line, and then back at my husband, who was now standing just a few feet away. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I couldn't go back, not anymore.